I drove up from Asheville to do this presentation. I have 3 more tomorrow night, Saturday afternoon, and Sunday afternoon in the Flemington Courthouse. Tomorrow night is, what am I doing? The other Lindbergh trial in Flemington. It's a new book I just wrote that just came out. You can get it on Amazon, or if you come to the program, it'll be available at the program. On Saturday afternoon, one of my favorite PowerPoints, it's all about the crazy things that happened in Flemington during the Hopewell-Lindbergh trial. And on Sunday, I'm doing a program I've only ever done once before, 12 theories of who kidnapped the Lindbergh baby. And I have pictures of each book in the PowerPoint where you can find this theory. This is the first time I've ever been on Zoom. I understand there's lots of people watching this. And I just want to say hello to my sister in Louisville, Kentucky, because I have done probably 150 to 200 talks on Lindbergh, and she's never seen one. So hopefully she didn't fall asleep and forget to turn her computer on. But anyway, I have lived in Hunterdon County all my life until just recently, when I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. Beautiful. I live 10 minutes from the Biltmore Estate. And right now, the hurricane is coming right through Asheville. And my wife called me at 6 o'clock this morning to tell me that I should have stayed home because she was bailing water. And as at 5 o'clock, she went through 29, help me out. No, not buckets. Keep going, bigger. Shop vac, thanks. Shop vacs. And it was, that storm hadn't even hit the full forces tonight. So I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad. I probably shouldn't say this in case she's watching, but this spring I told her we need a sump pump in the house. And I said, no problem, I can put one in. I was a contractor for 25 years. I said, just jackhammer a hole out, dig it out, and throw a sump pump in. No, I want a professional to do it. And somehow she never called. So I don't feel bad. I'll be back Monday and it'll be all over with and the basement will be dry. Anyway, let's talk about Lindbergh. I've studied Lindbergh and talked about Lindbergh probably for 30 years. I have 8 different presentations I do. One of my favorites is about Hopewell. For 15 years, I lived on Lindbergh Road, right across from the Lindbergh Estate. How many people have been in the house on the Lindbergh Estate? Come on, I know a lot of you. So I have given tours there until I got thrown off the property a couple of years ago. Maybe some of you read the book Cemetery John by Bob Zorn. One of my least favorite books, but I have to be careful in case he's in the audience. He did that to me one day. And he, just as I was going to say something about it, he jumped up out of the back row. But he's actually done presentations in Hopewell. I saw him down here in Vermont. And he stopped at my house one day. He says, I want to run to that Lindbergh house and take a couple pictures. I said, we can't get in. They have women in here now. So I said, oh, we'll just shoot down there. So I drive down the driveway. And halfway down, I get stopped by the director leaving. And the director says, what are you doing here? I said, well, I have a famous author here. I say it was me. I made her think it was Bob Zorn. And the woman says, go down, turn around, and get out of here. So we go down. I turn around, and he jumps out of the car to start taking pictures. And she came back, and not only did she throw me off the estate, but I got an email the next day from the Attorney General. So I haven't been back since that time. So if you have the opportunity of going to see the house, please take it. It's really a nice place that gives you a much better understanding of the whole kidnapping. So I want to talk a little bit about the beginning of the kidnapping, what happened the first couple of days, and then what happened in Hopewell. And I'm sure some of you people who live in the area will recognize some of the places in the slides. I'm sure that, let me just get the right clicker here. Okay, where are we? There we go. That was the Lindbergh house. It was started in 1930. They used an architect out of Princeton who had built the designed and built Next Day Hill, which was the Morrow estate up in Englewood. It was pretty much scaled down from Englewood. They had 3 servants here. Next Day Hill had 27 servants. But the Lindberghs rented a farm on Cold Soil Road for a year or so, and Lindbergh kind of supervised the construction of the house. He would come into town, Ann would come into town, and the local people said Ann was wonderful and he was terrible to deal with. So when he first bought the property, his father-in-law, Dwight Morrow, said, well, the first thing you need to do is get a guardhouse at the end of this property. He says, nobody will find this house. You know, the roads around here were all very, very narrow dirt roads. There were no road signs. Matter of fact, a lot of people walked from the Sourlands Mountains through trails right down into Hopewell. They didn't have cars up there. Nobody had electricity except Lindbergh, and I'll show you the picture. I think it's on this slide of their house lit up the night of the kidnapping. So he builds the house, and as you can see, you know, this is the entrance right here. The kidnapping occurred over there. But what I find interesting about this slide is that unlike today, there are no trees. This whole back area and all the way out to the road had been farmed. And I'll show you a better picture. There's the house, and right up here is where he was going to put an airstrip in. And it had already been cleared. And I talked to a woman, Mrs. Hausenbauer, that maybe some of you knew. She lived in the next house to mine. And her brother was paid 25 cents a day to pull rocks out of the field. But this is the best picture because here's the house, and right here is Featherbed Lane. And this was the airstrip. This is all wooded now. And they say the kidnappers pulled up in here and then walked across. So here's a picture of the baby. This was taken on his 1-year anniversary. He was 20 months old when he was kidnapped. What everybody thought was interesting is when they did the kidnap poster, they used the pictures from this period of time from his birthday. Now, anybody that has kids has tons of pictures when they're young, but they chose to use something that was 8 months old. So this is a layout of the house. Am I still standing in the right spot, Dave? So this is downstairs. You walk into the entrance. No, I'm on the wrong floor. This is downstairs. You walk in an entrance, and dining room, living room, kitchen, and then the staff lived over here. They had 3 people in the house the night of the kidnapping besides Ann and Charles. The Whatleys rather, husband and wife, they were there all the time. They lived in the house for about a year. And they had their rooms over the garage. The other person who came in that day was Betty Gow, the baby's nanny, who had stayed up in Englewood because the mother wanted to bond with the baby a little bit more. They had been on the Lindberghs had been on a 5-month tour of South America, coming up with areas for airports. And when they came home, the baby didn't even know Ann. So she was trying to get rid of the nanny for a while to be able to bond with Charlie. So upstairs, this is the baby's room, the nursery, with a bath, and then Betty Gow's bedroom, and then the Lindbergh's bedroom, and they had an adjoining bed. So the night of the kidnapping, as was the procedure every night, Betty Gow put the baby to bed at 7 o'clock, and at 10 o'clock, she would wake the baby and would change his diaper and give it something to eat and then put it back to bed. So actually Ann and Betty Gow put the baby to bed, and it was a little chilly. It was March 1st. The wind it rained all day. The wind was blowing, and you know how it can get up in the Sourlands in the wintertime. Not so nice. So Betty Gow made a little t-shirt to put on, put some Vicks Vapor Rub on the baby, and put it in bed And the baby had these thumb guards that wrapped around and tied on its wrists, and they had that on it, and then they pinned the blankets down, so the baby basically was stuck and couldn't move. So Anne and Charles are eating dinner, and he hears this thud, he thinks. Now, I find this kind of interesting because Lindbergh was deaf in one ear from flying. And he said it sounded like something crashed in the kitchen, like maybe an orange crate. Well, Anne didn't hear a thing, which is, there's so many crazy things about this night that happens. But at 10 o'clock, Betty Gow goes in, the one window is open, and she goes to pull the baby out of the bed, and there's no baby there. And Anne is in her bedroom getting changed, and she says, Anne, do you have the baby? And she said, no. So Betty Gow runs downstairs, and Lindbergh was famous for pulling pranks. And she thought perhaps he had hit the baby again. He had done this several times in the past. And she said, Charles, Colonel, she always called him Colonel, do you have the baby? He says, no, they've stolen our child. Now, before he even looks, he pronounces that they've stolen the child. He runs upstairs, grabs his rifle, he goes out. The interesting thing is it's pitch dark and there's no flashlight in the house. So he sends Ollie Watley down to Hopewell to get a flashlight. Where he was going to get it at 10 o'clock at night on a Tuesday night, who knows? Maybe Gebhart. How many people remember I don't know when Gebhart's closed. Does anybody remember Gebhart's when it was there? It was a Hopewell house that just got torn down. Gone but not forgotten. All that spatzel in there, so good. But anyway, Lindbergh runs up to the bedroom, and here was the baby's crib. There was a rug and a table over here, but this was the window that the ladder was put up against. Now, you have to remember this. In front of the window, there was a dresser with a suitcase flat on it with kids' toys on that, top of the suitcase. And interesting enough, none of the toys were disturbed. So, here's a picture of the crib. And by the way, somebody might have this in their attic. A little trivia for you. Lindbergh was using used furniture. He had ordered all new furniture, probably Anne ordered the furniture. And they were using cast off from Next Day Hill. And at some point after the house was closed up and they moved out, they had an auction of all this furniture in Hopewell. And nobody knew it came from the Lindbergh house. So does anybody have a crib like this in their house today? Okay, well. So another odd thing about that night, they had two dogs. They had a big black German Shepherd by the name of Skane under the baby's crib. And for some reason, never explained, the dog was in a veterinarian hospital down in Princeton at the time. The other dog up there is Wagoose. And Wagoose was sleeping in the Watleys' end of the house when the kidnapping occurred, and he never barked at all that night. Apparently, the dog barked all the time. So this lent itself to the idea that possibly somebody in the house was part of the kidnapping. And we'll talk about that in a second. So that night, first the Hopewell police came up. Captain Williamson, he was the head of the police, and he and another guy came up, and they looked outside with flashlights, and they find two clues outside, a 3-section ladder, which was thrown 75 feet from the house, and underneath the window they found a Buck Brothers 3/4-inch chisel, which could have been from a workman because the house wasn't completely done yet, or it could have been from the kidnapper maybe trying to pry open the window. So this they called the state police at 10:30. By 11 o'clock, not only were the police at the house, but the first reporter from Princeton was there. The state of New Jersey had closed off all the roads leading out of the state, all the bridges, everything was closed. And they began searching every car that went through. Here's a picture of the house the next day. The state police closed off the top of the driveway, which I'll show you in a second. So two things happened that night. Down on Lindbergh Road, there was a farmer by the name of Henry Conover. And Henry Conover had a chicken coop close to, this is Featherbed Lane, very close to Featherbed Lane. Yeah. And he had lost some chickens lately. He thought chicken thieves were out again that night. And he was getting his gun and he saw two cars on Featherbed Lane take off. Now, how many people are familiar with Featherbed Lane today? Okay, quite a few of them. So on the Greenwood side, you can go back Featherbed Lane and it's all paved. From the Amwell side, it's just overgrown in a dirt road. Was a dirt road, and a bridge washed out in the 40s. And once the bridge washed out, they never fixed it on the one end. So about 4 o'clock in the morning, they found a trapper over in Skillman by the name of Oscar Bush, and they brought the trapper in, and Oscar Bush said that he followed tracks of at least one male and a female down to Featherbed Lane, and he thought from the way that brush was broken and so on that there were two cars involved, and he could see the tire tracks and everything else. So the next day, they were fooling around with the ladders. Now, they saw in the mud outside the house where the ladders had been placed. And they put first 3 sections up and it went way above the window. And it would have been pretty much impossible to get in the house from there. So they then put 2 sections up and they saw marks on the wall where the ladder had laid against the wall. What was interesting is they saw no mud on that ladder at all. And it was very muddy outside, and immediately the state police thought this whole thing had been a setup, that they probably actually didn't use the ladders. And the state police reconstructed the ladder just like this, and it took them like 25 or 30 times to climb up this ladder and get in that window. And they said, it's at night, it's cold, it's windy, it's pitch dark. How could anybody climb up that window, get into the baby's room, put the baby in some kind of a bag, get out of the ladder, and get down the ladder? And immediately they said, this had to be part of a gang that did this, that no one person could have done this. Well, right away, they start putting out wanted posters. Notice this is the baby's picture from his 1-year-old birthday. This is a poster I had. There's only 7 of them known. This was from Mexico. They even had posters printed up in Mexico. This was a worldwide search for the Lindbergh baby. They did have a couple of clues though. So right down the road was a guy a house that was the Lapika farm. How many people remember the junkyard up there on South Hill Road? What was the name of it? Mazzaro's Junkyard. Gone but not forgotten. They had a house, a farm on South Hill Road. If you went down that South Hill Road today, it was off into the right. And they just, the family just gave that property to East Amwell Township, and it was preserved up there. But Ben Lapika was a student down at Princeton Day, and he came home and he was checking the mail just down the road from the Lindbergh driveway. And remember, these roads are really narrow. And he said this car came, and it was a green car that had New Jersey license plates from Mercer County on it. And he said the car had to stop and kind of go up the bank, and he saw this guy with the fedora pulled down over his head with a ladder in the car. So that was the first clue. Now, I mentioned that at the end of the driveway was a house. This house had been the original farmhouse to part of the Lindbergh property. I didn't mention it before, but Lindbergh put together 13 pieces of property, and it was 425 acres, all of which is intact today. But the biggest piece of property belonged to a farmer. I think his last name was Robileski, something like that. Anyway, I talked to the daughters who live in Florida, that lived in the house at the time. They sold the property and moved into Hopewell. But the house was closed up, and immediately the state police commandeered the house and made it their headquarters. And every car that passed that house was stopped and the license plate written down all the way up until after the trial. Here's another picture of the house. And you can see Wagoosh outside. And there are the troopers right there. Now, this was right down the street from where I live. So the state police pretty much commandeered Lindbergh's house. They set up 30 beds in the dining room. They took his garage and they had teletype machines, phone lines, all kinds of things set up. And here's a picture of inside the garage. I have a lot of other pictures of this. But the place was crawling with like 30 or 40 state police all the time. They walked through the woods. Let me go back a second. When the kidnapping occurred, I told you the first reporter was there around 11 o'clock at night. By morning, the Lindbergh estate was just covered with reporters, much like ants on a bagel. And they had to walk right up through the woods. And finally, the state police had to seal off the property, so they took policemen, stationed them in the woods all around the property. They blocked off Amwell Road, the top of Amwell Road, where it meets Lindbergh Road now. And it was almost impossible to get into the Lindbergh estate after the first night. So here they are checking a car. Notice there's 3 policemen here. That's the driveway going right up this way. How am I looking on TV over there? Okay, good. I want to look my best. And here's some more people stopping. This is the mailbox to the Lindbergh house. No, let me go back. I'm getting all messed up here. Hang on a second. All right. We're way ahead here. All right. Don't touch a thing. All right. So here are the mailboxes. One of these mailboxes actually for my house. But notice they're all getting checked out. Now, here's the side of the house. Notice policemen have a camera here. They're going around trying to take pictures of any clues. Now, this is my house in the back. And at the time, my house was had 130 acres as a farm. It went all the way out to Spring Hill Road. But what was interesting is the property went all the way down past the Lindbergh driveway. New York Journal rented my house to put reporters in there because you couldn't get up that road. So if they could stay on the property, they could see who was coming in and out. By the way, some of the news companies rented ambulances. And if they thought something was going to break, they turned the lights and all the whistles and bells on and went up Lindbergh Road, and the cops were waving through. But there was a woman who wrote a book at the time called The Great Lindbergh Hullabaloo, Laura Vitae, and she stayed in my house, and she wrote about watching everybody going in the Lindbergh house, but she said my house at that time was painted red. It's yellow now if you drive up there. So this is Governor Moore coming in. He was a governor, and then after him was Governor Hoffman, and then he was governor again. So I found this picture in a book, which I ripped out, because this is the guy who lived in my house with his dog. Now, when Oscar Bush, well, if you go down to the State Police Museum, how many people have been in the State Police Museum? That's it? You people need to go. It's really great. They have over 500,000 documents about the Lindbergh case. But what's interesting is they interviewed all these different people that lived on in all the houses, first in a 3-mile radius and then a 5-mile radius, and they have all those reports. And the guy that lived in my house is a guy named Crystal Fleck, and they had 2 interviews with him. And he said earlier in the day he saw a car drive past with curtains in the windows and he couldn't see in. But at 8:30 at night, his dog started barking and took off down the Lindbergh driveway. And Oscar Bush, when he was looking at the tracks, said there was a man and a woman, maybe 2 men and a woman in dog tracks. So I think this dog was the only person that actually saw who kidnapped the Lindbergh baby. So here's a picture of Governor Moore. And I love this picture because you see these state policemen, maybe. I love this guy with these jack boots on. This guy would never give you a break if he stopped you to give you a ticket. Now, I told you that reporters climbed the trees on my property, looking at the Lindbergh driveway. Here's one of the reporters with a pair of binoculars. Now, this was the Depression. It was the high point of the Depression, 1932. And right down the roads from the Lindbergh house, they had this encampment of a woman, and I guess a guy lived there too, but she has 5 kids there living in a shack. The state police made them tear that down and move out, but I got that from a woman who lived later on in my house. So immediately, Lindbergh got a hold of some of his flyer friends to start canvassing the area by air. And they set up an airport right outside of town. If you go past Amwell Road heading to Blauenburg, that big field on the right became an airstrip. And he would, what are all those beeps that are up here and over here? Somebody is there. Oh, okay. Just checking it. One can never be too careful these days. Yeah. So anyway, they set up this airstrip, and a lot of his friends came in to canvass the area, but there were always entrepreneurs. And they actually had planes take off from Newark Airport flying over. Eventually, the FAA, I'm not sure it was called that then, banned flights after a week or so. But not all air flights were successful. Now, as I mentioned, they immediately started canvassing all the houses, looking in every possible spot that they might find a baby. This picture was taken at my neighbor's house. This cold storage place is still there. And cops were checking that out. They had 2 snowstorms and a major fire during the time when the baby was kidnapped until the corpse was found, May 12th. And Lindbergh was the only person to have, as I mentioned, electric lights on the mountain. And they came in off of Greenwood Avenue, all the way through the woods. And obviously this is somebody from JCP&L trying to fix the lines that are laying on the ground. Some things never change. So here's some pictures of where they're looking in a well, and they actually pull the well out. A lot of the locals complained because the state police would come in, search all these houses, pull all the wells out, and then leave. And you were expected to fix everything after they got done tearing the place apart. By the way, there were a lot of abandoned buildings up on the mountain at that time because this was the Depression and people just moved off the mountain. So I like this picture because these are reporters looking for clues. Now, Hopewell was filled with reporters at the time. And we'll see some pictures coming up. And they were sitting around waiting for news, and they weren't getting much from the state police. So they started going out on their own, looking for clues. And it was amazing because they would find stuff and take it to the state police, and the state police would never check out the clues. Over on Hollow Road, somebody contacted them and said, I have a shed on my property, and all of a sudden I found fresh baby diapers in there. And the state police never went out to check. So, another picture of the police taking pictures someplace looking for clues. But this is Chief Williamson from Hopewell, looking at an abandoned house up on the mountain, followed by them in Stony Brook, looking for clues. Now, how many people know Ray Dish in Hopewell? Okay, a lot of people. Is he running for anything these days? Okay. Well, this is his house. Reporters are in there checking out the homeowner out at the time to find out what the people in that house might have heard or seen or known about. This is my favorite picture. How many people know what this picture is? Come on, Hillbilly Hall. All right, how many people have been to Hillbilly Hall? Okay, almost everybody in here. The question is it open today or not? I don't even know. Sort of. Okay. So, you don't remember Hillbilly Hall? You're too young. No, I was going to say maybe you don't drink. I've done many a talk in Hillbilly Hall with a beer in my hand. Here the police, and also they had a lot of people from the Jersey City police come, because Jersey City police were the most respected police force in the state. The state police weren't that respected. They didn't even have a forensic lab at that time. But here they are checking out the Zion Post Office. And this is a New Jersey artillery unit that is on horseback on 518. And if you look right up here, oops, this thing has a mind of its own today. If you look right here, some girl and her pony has joined them. This is Hopewell back. This is 518. This is, I think, the only paved road in the area. And here's another favorite picture of mine that I know some of you know where this is. How many people, who wants to guess where this is? Well, you know it. I'm not going to let you guess. Anybody? That's right, down by the golf course. And that's the railroad trestle by the golf course. And these are reporters. I guess they're killing time because they have a little fire here. There's a coffee pot. There's cameras all over, movie cameras. This guy in the back, if you blow it up, is eating a hot dog. And, you know, they're just chilling out. There's another movie camera. You know, it's like, yeah, we don't have anything to do. Let's go out to Stony Brook and have a picnic, I guess, in the wintertime. This was one of my neighbors. I got this out of the Jersey City archives. And I told this story last week in one of the groups I talked about. This guy's name was Arthur Dial, or D-I-E-H-L. Is that right, Dial? All right, well, originally, at the time of the kidnapping, they lived up off of Greenwood Avenue in the woods that bordered the Lindbergh estate. And when I saw this picture, I thought this is pretty much exactly what the typical person on the mountain looked like. And Mark Falzini, who was the archivist at the State Police Museum, he and I did a book together, and we heard that the New Jersey Library had a lot of pictures in their archives. So I called up this woman, and she said, "How do you know about those pictures?" They're very defiant. I finally sweet talked her into letting us come up, and Mark brought a scanner. And she comes out with a folder of pictures about 3 inches thick, and there were over 100 pictures in there. And Mark was almost drooling because almost all of them we didn't have. So we were collecting pictures for this picture book that we did on the kidnapping. So she said, you're allowed to scan 10 pictures, that's it. And Mark was thinking like 99. So I had to take this woman out to lunch. She was about this big, very ancient, and 15 years ago she had purple hair. And Mark stayed and he scanned all 100 pictures. And I had to listen to this woman's every malady she had for 80 years at lunch. And all I know is Mark got the best deal of that day. And in our book, I think we used 3 of her pictures, which we gave her credit for. But I had mentioned that during the kidnap period, they had a major fire, a raging fire up on the Sourlands Mountains. And Lindbergh actually helped put it out. That's the Hopewell fireman in the back one. But that looks like a pile of scrap wood probably from Lindbergh's house. It was very windy that period of time. So this is a picture, as you can probably guess, of Hopewell. And the Lindbergh house was right up here. Notice that all these fields were farmed, and you could actually see the house. Right down here is the railroad track, and then this is Broad Street. And I think right down in here is where the school had just been built. Maybe right there, one of those. And then we come to the most famous part of or building in Hopewell at the time. This was Gebhart's store. Now, Mr. Gebhart was over 300 pounds. And it was basically an ice cream store, a little deli, and up above they had tourist rooms. Well, this is where all the reporters congregated during the period from March 1st until May 12th when they found the body. And if you notice, it says Gebhart's Hotel, the Times Square of Hopewell. And this, let me just see, okay. So it's very crowded, there's a motorcyclist, but I think on the next picture, it's even better because you see the movie cameras there. And I did this talk at some time a while ago when some person jumped out of the audience and said, that's my father. He told me about this picture and I never saw it before. And here's another picture of Gebhart's. Now, what intrigues me is the interior of Gebhart's. And I just saw that the Historical Society has not only this picture, but a couple other interior shots you should look at before you leave. I find it very interesting. This looks like something out of an old 1930s movie. First of all, you have 2 people broadcasting. You have a guy on a telegraph. You have a couple typewriters here. This guy has his hat up. I swear to God, he looks like he comes out of a movie. And he has a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and there's cigarette butts all over the floor. Notice the crowd of people in there as well. So Gebhart was not foolish. He stayed open 24 hours a day during this period of time and probably made tons of money. I don't know where he got all the food, but he was open all night long. Now, there was another place in Hopewell where you could get food. And it was right down the street, that way. You know what that is? Yeah. It's a liquor store today. And they actually had tablecloths on their tables, and it was, I guess, a pretty fancy place. That's where Colonel Schwarzkopf used to like to dine. Now, how many people remember St. Michael's? Orphanage, okay. So St. Michael's Orphanage was just down, well, they don't call it Carter Road up here. What do they call Princeton Avenue. Okay, it was right down Princeton Avenue. And at the time, they had 450 kids staying in the orphanage. And it was over 600 acres that they farmed, and they were pretty much self-sufficient. I think they tore it down about 1972 or someplace in there. Sorry? 73. You did have to correct me, didn't you? 72 was close enough, but okay. And one of the things that the newsmen did is they tended to stage pictures for the press. And here's one that I really like. These are little kids praying for the return of the Lindbergh baby. Totally staged. But my favorite one is this one, where a guy has a radio in the barn while he's milking the cow. Now, half the people didn't even have electricity, let alone having it in the barn to listen to the latest updates. Now, here's the picture you were looking for, Dave. Now, you said this is in front of the post office. Where was the post office at the time?
Well, it's now in the library.
Oh, in the library, at the library, that was it? Okay.
That's the front.
Okay. So this is the mailman, and he had to deliver, matter of fact, some of you might even remember. I talked to his son in California. He sent me some pictures. He was the person that had to deliver mail at the Lindbergh house. And the first month they got over 40,000 letters. And 10% of them, not 10%, 10,000 of them were clues. 10,000 were psychic things. I had a dream, or my psychic club, whatever. 10,000 were nasty letters. And the other 10,000, I don't remember what they were, but they got 40,000. And he goes up to that guard gate, and they said, no, you can't deliver any mail. He says, the mail must go through. And he just charged down the driveway and delivered the mail to the garage they had set up there. And here he is delivering mail on Lindbergh Road. I don't think that's the Lindbergh house, the house at the end of the driveway, because he had too many letters to take down there. So, and then here's the train station. Now, the train station played an important role in what was going on in town. Across the train station was the telephone company. And the night of the kidnapping, the young girl was asleep on the job because nobody made calls Tuesday night at 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And she was asleep when the phone rang, and she had to patch the phone from Lindbergh's house, and his phone number was 23, by the way. And she passed it down to the state police. But after that, they had a whole bank of operators set up in Hopewell. And across the street at the railroad station, they ran all these phone lines from West Trenton all the way in to Hopewell to the train station, where they had banks of phones and phone booths set up. So the kidnapping occurs on March 1st. Colonel Schwarzkopf thinks that it had to be the work of a gang, probably 4 men and a woman, and probably somebody within the staff, that nobody would have known that the Lindberghs were going to be there on a Tuesday night. They always left on Sundays. And how would they even find the house at night in the middle of the Sourlands? So they're investigating all these clues for a gang. And in the meantime, Lindbergh is getting ransom notes. He found a ransom note in the bedroom that night. It was interesting. And that, when you start reading about this kidnapping, there's so many strange things that go on. It's a lot like the Kennedy assassination. You can't make head nor tails. Whatever book you read, you believe that until you go to the next book. So Betty Gow and Ann Lindbergh go into the room, and they don't see any ransom note. And it was only when Lindbergh goes in the room does he say, oh, there's a ransom note on the window sill. Now, why it didn't blow off, who knows, because it was a windy night. But anyway, he finds this, and over the course of a month, he gets 15 different ransom notes. Most of them go to a intermediary by the name of John Condon, who lives in the Bronx. And another weird thing, John Condon was an educator. He's retired. He was 73 years old. And he is so upset about the Lindbergh kidnapping, he puts an ad in the Bronx Daily Eagle. And it says, no, I'm sorry, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, that has a circulation of 10,000 people, which when you're thinking of New York City with the New York Times and New York Journal, and there's like 25 other newspapers, he puts an ad in there saying, I will act as an intermediary for anybody that kidnapped the Lindbergh baby and wants to contact Lindbergh. Lo and behold, the next day, he gets 20 letters, one of which is from the kidnappers. So he becomes the intermediary, and on April 2nd, without going through a big story, he and Lindbergh drive out to St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx, and they exchange $50,000 in ransom money with this kidnapper. And by the way, while they're there, two different people come walking past. Let me delve into a little bit deeper. Lindbergh stayed in the car and John Condon made the money pass. And while Lindbergh was in the car, two different people came past with handkerchiefs over their face. So they were pretty sure this was a gang still. Well, they get a note in exchange saying the baby is on a boat off of Martha's Vineyard called the Nelly. And they describe the boat. And the next day, Lindbergh gets a plane, and he and Condon and his attorney, Colonel Breckenridge, get in this plane, and they look all over. They have a Coast Guard looking, and after 2 or 3 days, they can't find the boat, and they can't find the baby. So now, this is the beginning of April. He gets involved with another intermediary that I won't get into now because that's my talk tomorrow night in Flemington. In case anybody wants to come, I hope you're free, Andrea, because you'll find this talk exciting and you never heard anything about this. But he's running around off the coast of Virginia and off the coast of Cape May with a guy by the name of John Curtis, when he gets a note that they have found a corpse of the baby off of Princeton Avenue. Now, this was the two people that found the corpse. They were driving from Princeton down into Hopewell, and the black gentleman who actually knew had to go to the bathroom, and they pull over to the side. He goes into the woods. How many people know where the baby was found? A couple of you? In case you want to scope it out, I was there a couple of weeks ago. Have you ever been over there, Russ? Okay. I was down past there the other day. As you're going past you pass the school and then you pass where St. Michael's was, and on the right-hand side was a guardrail. There's a little creek that goes through there. They had all kinds of construction going on there 2 weeks ago when I went past. I'm sorry? No, okay. Well, it was right in there. And he's going to the bathroom and he looks down and he sees an old burlap bag, and then he sees what he thinks is a corpse, and he gets down, he looks closer, and he's like freaking out that it is a corpse. So he doesn't really touch the corpse. He runs into Hopewell and finds Chief Williamson at the barber shop, which at the time was on Seminary Avenue. And they go out and they call the state police. Schwarzkopf just happened to be at the time up at the Lindbergh estate. And they come down, and the baby is missing one leg and one arm. And all its insides had been eaten out or were missing. When they turned it over, its face was looked like a person, but it turned black almost immediately. So here's a picture of the burlap bag. By the way, the black gentleman worked for my grandfather, and I knew him for a long time. He lived in Pennington before I realized that he had found the Lindbergh baby. So this was the burlap bag, and they took this over to Bristol Myers Labs, which at that time was on 206 someplace, and they had them check it. They found hair fibers of the baby, they found teeth in there, and they found the what can I say? The presence of chloroform in the bag. So apparently the baby had been chloroformed and then put in this bag. So they could, and it had a fractured skull. They could not tell how the skull was fractured. And if you read Lindbergh books, there's got to be about 5 different ways this thing was fractured. But here's a picture. The Lindbergh house is right up here. And you can see all the way down to where the baby was found, right in here. And some of you may have seen this picture before. I know a woman from Jersey City that said the traffic was backed up all the way to the Somerville Circle to come out here to see where the baby was. And in every case, there's an entrepreneur. Actually, this probably would have been me. Somebody with an entrepreneurial spirit set up a hot dog stand right across where the baby was found. So the baby was found on May 12th. And somebody broke into the morgue and took a picture of the baby. And at the time, Lindbergh was off on a boat, the Cachalot, off of Cape May, looking to make an exchange for the baby with this group that John Curtis was dealing with. And he was at sea when they found the baby. And just about everybody in the country knew the baby had been found dead, but Lindbergh. And he came ashore and drove in a raging rainstorm from Cape May that night and got to the house about 5 or 6 in the morning. And the next day he went down to the mortuary, which was on, I think, Greenwood Avenue in Trenton. And when he got there were over 500 people, and somebody had already printed out pictures of the baby and were selling them for $5, which was pretty gross. But Betty Gow identified the baby because she had made that nightshirt for the baby, and it had a special blue thread on it, and they matched the thread up, and they said, this is the nightshirt that the baby had on when it was kidnapped. Lindbergh, however, came in. He only spent 2 minutes in there. He put his hand in the baby's mouth and said, yes, this is my son, and he had it cremated right away. A couple of interesting things about this whole identification. The baby had been to its doctor 2 weeks before, and the doctor said, for $1 million, I couldn't say that this was the Lindbergh baby. They couldn't even tell what sex it was. It was so deteriorated. So there's a whole thing in Lindbergh area. Lindbergh, what would be a good term for this? For the study of Lindbergh. Lindberghology, okay. There's a whole thing that the actual baby was not the Lindbergh baby. But Lindbergh wanted to end this whole thing, so he identified it as his baby. Matter of fact, one person said it looked like all the organs had been surgically removed, except for the liver. And the latest book to come out about Lindbergh came out a year ago. It said, it's by Lisa Perlman, and the title is The One That Got Away. The person who engineered the kidnapping that didn't get caught. And this book hypothesizes that Lindbergh and an associate of his that he worked with in New York City, Alexis Carrel, who was into eugenics. And eugenics was very big at this time. And Skillman, all the epileptics that came in were sterilized. This was like normal. He was working with Carrel on a perfusion pump to keep organs alive after the person's heart had been opened up and would be kept alive, and they did it successfully with mice and rabbits and things like that. So this woman's theory, and the one that got away, was that the baby was deformed and Lindbergh's wife was pregnant with their second child. So they actually operated on this baby and took out its organs to try to keep him alive in petri dishes or whatever. So it's a great book until you get to the last chapter. And then it's like, oh boy. So I don't know if I buy that, but anyway. So 2 years go by, and the state police have no clues. They won't take any help from the New York police, from FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. They won't take any help from probably the most famous detective in the world who lived in Burlington County. His name was Ellis Parker. So they had gone nowhere with clues and getting this kidnapping solved in 2.5 years. And everybody was making fun of the state police. Well, then they get a break. And the break is, oh, I thought I talked 2 hours. I didn't talk an hour. Okay. So the break was that they had, out of the $50,000 ransom that was paid, $38,000 was in marked gold certificates that they kept the serial numbers on. And immediately in Manhattan and in the Bronx, all kinds of gold certificates were appearing. And they would take the gold certificates. Every banker, by the way, had a little folder with all the certificate numbers on it. And if anybody made a deposit with a gold certificate, you had to check it against this list of numbers. And they had pins and a map. And the pins would be where they found all these things. And they saw this long line down Lexington Avenue in New York and throughout the Bronx. Well, one day this guy pulls into a gas station. The federal government had already called in these. They went off the gold standards, and then gold coins or gold certificates had to be turned into the banks. And it was very rare to see these things. This happened in 1933. In 1934, this guy goes to buy 25 cents worth of gas, and he pays for the $10 gold certificate. And the gas station attendant says, "This money isn't any good anymore." He says, "Oh yeah, it is. I got tons of it." Well, the gas station attendant is pretty leery, so he writes the license plate number on the back of the bill, and it gets turned into the bank, and a teller sees the number. They get a hold of the gas station attendant. His name was Walter Lyle, and they said, "You've got this gold certificate." He said, "Yeah, but I wrote the license plate number." So that's how they pick up Bruno Haltman in the Bronx, and he's got $17,300 worth of gold certificates stashed in his garage. Now, very briefly, he says he got this from a friend of his, Isidore Fish, who was a known criminal, who was going to Germany, and they gave a going away party for Fish at Haltman's apartment, and they said, "Take this box that I'm giving you and put it away. I'll be back for it." So Haltman puts it up on the top shelf of a closet in his kitchen, and Fish goes to Germany, gets tuberculosis, and dies. And the box stays up there until Haltman's roof starts leaking. The box gets wet, he pulls it down, and he finds all this money in there. And he did what any American male would do. He kept it for himself and didn't tell his wife. And he hid it in the garage, and he was spending this freely. It wasn't like he knew that this was marked money and he had to be careful. And he went out and he bought an expensive radio and $400 pair of binoculars, which is in the 30s was probably about a $2,000 pair today. So they catch the guy, but they have to be able to extradite him to New Jersey. This is how we get back into the Sourlands. That was a long, circuitous route to get back to Lindbergh Road. But they had to find somebody that saw Lindbergh, saw Hauptmann in the area, so they could extradite him back to New Jersey. So they re-canvass the whole Sourlands area, and they find two people. The first person was Millard Whitehead. And Millard Whitehead, some of them are still in the mountain. I did a talk at Hillbilly Hall, and I'm talking about Millard Whitehead when this woman jumps up and says, "That's my uncle." I said, "Oh boy." So, is anybody related to Millard Whitehead here before I get going? All right. Well, Millard Whitehead lived in a shack. Here's his picture on Lindbergh Road. And I'll tell you where the shack still is, but you'd never recognize it. You know where Mazzero's junkyard was? Everybody said yes. If you go past there, heading down the road towards Hopewell, there's like a big Spanish house on the left. How many people know that house? Okay, good. I got a couple of you on it. Well, Millard Whitehead lived in this shack with his brother-in-law and wife, and it looks like there's 5 kids there. And he and his brother-in-law were loggers up there. Now, they had already interviewed both of them twice, and they said, "No, we haven't seen anybody up here." But then Governor Moore, after the baby was found, came up with a $25,000 reward for anybody that could help catch the Lindbergh kidnappers. So the state police go and they stop and they see Millard Whitehead again. They said, "Well, we have a reward out. Have you ever seen this guy?" And Millard said, "Yeah, I've seen him twice. Walking down the road here, coming out of the woods." And his brother-in-law says, "That is so much BS." And his brother-in-law actually was for the defense in the trial in Flemington against him. The state police were so worried that this guy would change his story, they zipped him off the mountain, put him in a house in Lambertville with an armed guard until the trial, because they didn't want the press to get to this guy because they knew he changed his story. So now we have Millard Whitehead saying they saw Bruno Hauptmann. Well, they needed one other person. And what better person to get than somebody who's blind? So then they go to Amanda's Hopmuth. And I'm going to tell you where this guy lived because most of you will know. You go out down towards Glauenberg and you hit Amwell Road, the house on the left, right on the corner, is where he was. Now, Millard was 87. He had been an officer in the Prussian army, and he had cataract so bad he was legally blind. And they come to him, and the state police say, "Well, do you know anything about seeing this Hauptmann guy? There's a $25,000 reward out that you might get part of it." He said, "Oh yeah, I saw the guy." He turned the corner to go up Amwell Road out of Hopewell. I was sitting on my porch. Now, March 1st was a rainy, windy, nasty day. He says, "I was sitting on my front porch when this car turned and slid into the ditch, and I saw a guy in the car. It looked just like him, and he had a ladder in the car." Well, that didn't fit the state police scenario too much. So by the time he got to Flemington, Amanda's Hopmuth, his story had changed. I was out feeding my chickens at 5 o'clock at night when this car passed. But he was kind of a crazy person. David Willens, the prosecutor in Flemington, was so worried that he wouldn't see where Hauptmann was in the courtroom that he rehearsed Hopmuth going from the witness chair to where Hauptmann was sitting. So he's on the witness chair, and Willens says, "So, Mr. Hopmuth, could you identify, go over it and touch Bruno Hauptmann's shoulder?" And he gets up and he goes and he puts his hand on the shoulder, and a fuse blew in the courthouse. And the whole courthouse went dark. And one of the reporters said it was like the hand of God had just come down on Bruno Altman, and that was it. But as a postscript, he did get $3,000 of the reward money, as did Millard Whitehead. And I got to go back and tell you about Millard Whitehead's house. Just bear with me a second. So I mentioned that Spanish house. So years ago, Millard Whitehead's house had just about fallen down into nothing. And somebody bought that property and they wanted to tear the house down and build a new house. Well, this is East Downwell. The zoning officer, the building inspector said, no way. They had to build that whole Spanish house around Millard Whitehead's shack. And I've talked to people, if you go in, you sort of see the sticks of the original house right in the living room. But so Mandus Hochmuth goes to get his money from Governor Hoffman down in Trenton. And Hoffman knows that this guy is blind. So he's in the office, they're in the office together, and 10 feet away, there's a flower pot with flowers in it. And Governor Hoffman says, so, Mr. Hochmuth, what's on that table over there? And he squints and he looks and says, oh, it's a woman's hat. And that's how blind the guy was, but he did get $3,000. And this is his house on 518, which is covered in shrubs right now, but you can pretty much make it out. And then finally, the last slide is of the baby on the cover of Time magazine. So that's it for searching the Sourlands. I'll address any questions anybody has. Don't tell me there's no question. Now I'm hurt. No, wait a second. Go ahead.
So, what are your earlier thoughts?
Yeah, they found a couple of. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You also said that the lab.
That's right. So, one of the theories was that Lindbergh was actually involved in this whole kidnapping. And he went up and grabbed the baby and had mud on his shoes and then left. And whatever happened, some people said it was part of a prank and that the prank went bad. That's one theory. Another theory was he handed it off to people who took the baby to Princeton. The baby was sick and the baby died, and the people freaked out so much they dumped the baby on Princeton Avenue. If you come to my talk on Sunday, I'll go over every one of these different theories. And it's free, 2 o'clock, Sourlands Courthouse. Anybody else? Yes.
So, is there actual pictures of the baby?
Well,
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, the question was, did they have any pictures of the baby at the correct age? Yes, they did, but they weren't made public. All the Lindbergh archives are up at Yale University, and you can actually go and see them now. They're open to the public. And also Ann Morrow's papers are at Smith College, where she went to school. Anybody else? I'm a little surprised. Every talk I've ever given, go ahead.
I heard recently that there's a gentleman that wants to reopen the case.
Oh, yeah.
And DNA is secret.
Right. So
Question.
the question was, recently there's been news about people wanting to open the case and check the DNA on the envelopes. Let's talk about DNA for a second. When DNA started to become a viable thing, the Lindbergh family immediately went to the state police headquarters and had everything in there that could relate to the baby's DNA taken out of the headquarters. And Mark Falzini was beside himself because all this stuff was not so much evidence, but it was part of a museum. And, well, I guess evidence too. But they had pieces of the baby's hair in vials. They had teeth. They had the burlap bag that I showed a picture of. They had some clothing. All that was removed from the State Police Museum. So there's a lot of questioning of whether the notes were written by Bruno Hauptmann or not. So there's been a move to try to get the state of New Jersey to allow them to take the stamps off the envelopes and do a DNA test on the back of the stamps to see whose DNA was on there. So, well, they don't have, they have DNA of, well, they probably get DNA of Hauptmann because they have all of his clothes, his shoes, they have everything down there. Yes, miss.
This is one of those things you hear at different places, but I always thought that Lindbergh wanted to take charge of everything.
Oh, yeah. So the question was, did Lindbergh really want to take charge of everything? And yeah, you know, I think he got a very swelled head after he came back and became the most famous person in the world after the 1927 flight. And Colonel Schwarzkopf, the head of the state police, actually had a picture of Lindbergh on his desk. And he idolized the guy. And Lindbergh just took charge of the entire investigation. Schwarzkopf couldn't even interview the servants at the Hopewell house or the servants at Next Day Hill without either him being there or checking him out at all. And it wasn't until after the corpse was found that Lindbergh gave him a free rein to investigate. So, anybody else? Yes. Where was Anne? Well, Anne stayed in the house. Her mother came down and a couple of friends came down. She might, because the house was so overrun with police and people coming in and out all the time, she pretty much stayed in the bedroom. The mother brought food from Englewood down every day to feed all the people in the house because they only had a cook and a butler there, really, and they would have been overwhelmed. So Mrs. Morrow sent all this food down. And if you read Anne's memoirs of this period, it was called Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead. And she talks about, she almost infers that she thought the baby was dead right away because the way she talks in this thing, she doesn't say it, but she wrote all these letters to her two sisters, to her brother, to her mother, to her in-laws and friends. So she went through those and wrote this memoir. It didn't come out till 1971 or 72. And from that point on, she gets very, very depressed, even though she had eventually 5 other children. The period after this kidnapping, it was so bad that she couldn't stay in the house anymore. Once they left the house, that was it. They never went back. Although Lindbergh and Farrell looked at that house to see about turning it into a eugenics lab. But then World War II broke out and Farrell was from France and he went back to France. So anybody else? Come on, Andrea, I know you have a question. I want to get it. Okay. So, all right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.